Yeah. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, let me share my screen. Let me know if you can see my screen, then we can get started.
All good.
All right. Hey, everybody. I go by Kao. I lead the digital team here at Seaworld Parks and Entertainment. I've been in this role for a couple of years now. Prior to this, I was a VP of product at Walmart, and I've spent most of my product management career working in retail, as you guys can see here. The agenda for today, like Mahip was saying, is we've been through a pretty significant digital transformation at Seaworld over the last couple of years. And while the work itself, I wouldn't say it's rocket science, what's pretty special about it is we did it in a relatively short period of time. Over most of the transformation work was done in about 18 months. And we've done it with a relatively small internal team, and supplemented it with external partners. For context, the internal team that we have is anywhere from 2 to 4 product managers, 2 designers, 1 data analyst, and we have a pretty light engineering and ops team that supports them. So my plan is to walk through some of that journey, and hopefully you'll be able to take some of those learnings and apply them to your own work. I'll start with a short introduction to the company. Seaworld Parks and Entertainment is a holding company that owns 12 different theme parks. We're in 6 different locations in the US. We're going international in 2023. We have a number of recognized brands like SeaWorld, Busch Gardens, Aquatica, and Sesame Place. We're a 50-year-old public company. Depending on the year, we're anywhere between 20 and 25 million customers. We're a little under $2 billion in revenue, and we're a very high margin business, relatively speaking. So you'll see that nearly 40% of that revenue flows through to EBITDA. We have animals under our care, so we also are a leading marine conservation agencies. Over the past many years that we've been doing this, we've rescued and rehabilitated over 40,000 animals. From a business performance standpoint, we started a private equity-led turnaround around 2018, 2019. And COVID was a bit of a wash, but just before COVID and then right after COVID, we've had one record quarter after another. And we've gone from a $350 million bottom line company to over $650 million. And we've done that through a number of levers. We've made some intelligent capital investments in rides, as an example, new rides. We've got smart with how we do pricing. We've run a number of cost initiatives. And then we've also, I'll be talking more in detail about the digital improvements that we've had. And then we're well past half of the turnaround, but we've got a number of other things coming, like international expansion and hotels. So there's more work to be done. I'm assuming most of you are not from the theme park industry, so I'll share a little bit of context on why digital is even important in this business before we get into details of the transformation itself. The theme parks make their money in a couple of ways. One is before a customer comes to a theme park, they buy tickets or annual passes. And so that's one stream of revenue, and that represents roughly about 60% of revenue that company makes. The other 40% comes from when people are inside the theme park. So once they get into the park, they're buying products like Skip the Line, or what we call Quick Queue, or buying food. So that all goes into the in-park revenue stream, which is the other 40%. So from a pre-visit experience standpoint, the opportunity for digital is a couple of things. One is, after COVID, about 75-80% of these admissions products that are sold happen directly to the website. So if you think about the opportunity, you're getting a ton of digital adoption, and your website is really a gateway to your parks. So you have this incredible opportunity to communicate why and what people should experience when they come to the park. So I think that's a pretty incredible opportunity. And then if you're able to make the path to purchase frictionless, or you're able to increase desirability for people to buy these tickets or passes, then not only does it help you sell more tickets and annual passes, but also these people eventually show up in the park and they'll end up spending money in the park as well. So it also increases your in-park revenue. And then on the in-park experience side, the opportunity for digital, the one thing that theme park customers, if you guys have been to a theme park, especially with kids, the one thing that people absolutely hate is having to wait in line. So the opportunity is to build out a high utility digital assistant in the form of, say, a mobile app that these customers can use to maximize their times in experiences that matter and minimize their time waiting. And as you're able to get more adoption and people see the utility for using apps like this, then what you're also going to see is you will drive incremental revenue through in the moment discretionary purchases. And at the same time, as people start doing more things on their phone, and there's potentially less labor utilization and the less labor being used in the park, you're also going to improve operating efficiency. And then you've got all of this incredible data that you're collecting from people using the mobile apps. So you're able to do intelligent things like building out an operational dashboard that helps the folks that run the parks understand where are people at which point in time. And then you can do interesting things like crowd management or provide incentives for people to go to places that they haven't been to. So there's a number of interesting things that you can do on the in-park experience side. When I initially came on board in late 2020, we had no team for the nature of work that we were brought on to do. So skills like product management, user experience design, and data analytics for digital were completely missing. We had very, very little data related to our digital experiences, and technology was considered more of a cost center than a revenue driver. So we had to do some pretty foundational things in the first 90 days to change that. So in terms of the work that went into the first 90 days, the first was to onboard a leadership team. I've been really lucky to have a lean but extremely hands-on leadership team. So we were able to get one product lead for the website, one for the apps, a design leader, an analytics leader, and then an engineering leader. And then I had an operations team that I inherited from other leaders in the company. And what's been interesting is not only are these folks like extremely hands-on, but they've also been able to embody the team mission. And we've been able to attract some great talent, not because of their experience being relevant, because none of them are really from the theme park industry, but because they're all really good at what they do and their functions. It's also really critical for us it was critical for us in the first 90 days to come up with a vision and a strategy for how we're going to improve digital experiences. So the kinds of things that we did there were we went to the parks, we spent some time with customers, we did some competitive analysis. We didn't have customer feedback at the time, so we used our call center to talk to guests and understand what their pain points were. And then I personally probably watched about 100 hours of session replays of customers using our websites to get a feel for what are the biggest sources of frustration, and leverage that to build out a 2-page vision document Interestingly, that 2-pager still continues to be pretty valid. I would say 90-95% of it is still pretty accurate, and it's not dated. And then more importantly, you want to supplement that vision with meaningful OKRs. OKRs stand for objectives and key results. And on a quarterly basis, or at the beginning of the year, we come up with objectives and measurable results for the year to make sure that we're hitting these milestones along the way as we get towards our longer term vision. So we set up these OKRs at the beginning of the year. Obviously, we will adapt a small portion of them based on business needs and changes, but the vision continues to be pretty constant, and then the OKRs will kind of change year to year or quarter to quarter, depending on what our focus area looks like. Then Mahip talked about execution. So our execution has been pretty strong. We started out trying to understand a lot of the business via data, everything from customer feedback to conversion funnels to engagement data, page interaction data, to session replayers, like I was mentioning, as well as transaction data. So we built a pretty good framework of data to understand more about the business, given many of us were new to the theme park business. It was important for us to be the first team that understood when something was broken in our experience. So we set up, we would go over metrics on a weekly basis. We'd have daily reports that go out, and then we also had near real-time monitoring that would trigger and send out notifications to us if something was out of whack. Everyone does prioritization a different way. For us, we had to come up with a prioritization framework, which I think was pretty, nothing extraordinary about it, but we aligned on a prioritization network, on a framework, and we wanted to get the most impact for the least amount of effort. And given that we were going from a 0 to 1 on a lot of our digital experiences, we want to also make sure that the feasibility was relatively high and the risk was low in making some of these changes. And then most importantly, in the first 90 days, we were able to execute a few A/B tests and show that we could drive millions of dollars of impact. And I think that's what gave my board of directors some confidence that this was a good investment. So those were the foundational things. The actual transformation work happened in 2 parts. The first one was to rebuild our mobile apps. And you'll see here on the left that our mobile apps, our prior mobile apps were actually really poorly rated, and they had a number of gaps. They were rated roughly about 2 on 5 stars. It was what we called a mobile app at the time was a native wrapper around some website pages that we had pulled together that we thought was relevant to have on a mobile app. We did not have interactive maps, so our maps were in PDF format, and they were sized to the browser. If you looked at a point of interest, it wasn't information like ride wait times or ride height eligibility. That kind of information that would be helpful for someone when they're in the park was either like missing or inaccurate because it was being entered by ride operators. And then overall, it was pretty slow and buggy. And as a result of all of those, it was, as expected, it was pretty minimal in park usage. And you kind of see here, I took one of the comments that we got in either on the App Store or some feedback that we got on our app. And it's like I think it summarizes things nicely. This customer said the app is not a very helpful web wrapper that was mainly focused on buying tickets, not something that you'd be interested in when you're already in the park. So the transformation work was, we worked with an external vendor to help us accelerate the work, and then we transitioned to an in-house team. We took about 6 months to build out the core engine, from which different apps for different parks that we owned could be spawned. And then we spent the remaining 6 months to do a slow rollout, one park at a time, validating at every step that things were working as expected. So we built out these new apps from scratch. One significant decision we made was not to try and do everything with the mobile app. We decided that we would stay laser focused on making sure that the day of visit experience was really good for these customers. So as an example, once somebody walks into a park, they are looking to pull up tickets or annual passes that they previously purchased and have them be scanned as you walk into the park. They want access to show schedules. They want interactive maps with point-to-point directions and being able to navigate to those places. When they're looking at points of interest like a restaurant or a ride, you want to provide information that's relevant, right? Like you want to help people understand whether something is an adult ride or a kid-friendly ride, what the minimum ride height eligibility looks like, what the ride wait times are. Similarly, for a restaurant, you want to show what the open and closing hours for the restaurant are, what kind of food they give. So those are all the kinds of things that we decided to focus on when we said we built out this phase one of the app. We made some interesting engineering decisions as we built out the mobile apps. So if you pull up one of our mobile apps today, you'll see that a lot of the functionality is in native technology. However, the moment you get to the part where you're purchasing a product, which means you're going to a product page and then the cart and checkout, we intentionally chose to build all those in web technology. And there were a couple of reasons why we did that. One is, it would help us get to market significantly faster if we used web technology than trying to build this out in iOS and Android, when the experience was like pretty identical. So we didn't want to over-engineer it. Second is, in the future, it would give us an opportunity to run some pretty quick A/B tests and experiments and refine the funnel. And that experimentation cycle would have been a lot harder for us, longer, if we decided to build that in native technology. The app is only as good as the underlying data, and this was probably the most painful portion of getting our apps to be pretty highly rated. So at the time, no one in the company had digital maps for our 12 parks. So we had to go and build out 19,000 layers to actually have these digital maps built out for each of our theme parks. What was even crazier was we have these 1,500 points of interest locations across our 12 parks. These are things like your restaurant or ride or shows. And we did not have structured data, like the ones that I described earlier. But even something as basic as the latitude and longitude of that particular point of interest in the park was unknown. So we had to have people in the park actually walk the parks and drop a pin and then compile all of the structured information about each of the point of interest to make sure that the app experience was really good. And then something that I'm personally really excited about is our ride wait time calculation. So this data was largely unreliable. And it was unreliable because we were banking on ride operators to manually enter wait times. And unfortunately, when you rely on, when there's human intervention involved, you don't have that be of high quality. So one of the things that we've done over the past year or so is we've installed cameras at the beginning of the line, at the end of the line. And we've been able to use the velocity of people going through to calculate what the throughput looks like. And we've been able to get to about an 85% accurate ride wait time calculation. So that's all the work that we did to clean up the underlying data. And then when you are a physical business, you cannot just create something digital and expect people to magically start using it. So we had to go and work with the park operations team to change the way that the redemption or the scanning of these purchases work off of mobile devices in the new app. And then there's been a lot of ongoing work to change the way kitchens operate in our restaurant, the way that customers interact with restaurants to order food in order for us to integrate mobile food ordering into it. So there's a lot more work to be done there, but like some pretty significant changes and investment has gone into making the app successful. We initially started with an internal employee alpha after the first 6 months of putting it out. And then we did a little beta across two of our parks, Seaworld and Aquatica, which is a water park. And then based on the feedback, we had to pivot on a couple of things, but for the most part, I think the app was like pretty well received. And then once we were convinced that the apps were well received and high rate and were rated pretty high, we started doubling down on marketing. So, we've looked at a number of digital marketing levers like our own websites and emails. And then we're starting to install QR codes all over the park, which will help us drive adoption and downloads. One thing I should mention about these QR codes, I didn't bring it up earlier, is one of the other decisions that we made as we built out the app is to allow these product pages to be directly linked to from a QR code. And the rationale for that was when you have somebody that's standing in front of a ride and they want to skip the line and there is a QR code in front of them, you don't want them to scan the QR code and spend their time downloading an app. What you want to do is you want them to scan a QR code, go straight to the product page on a mobile browser, purchase that item, and then you want to allow them to have the option of downloading the app if they found that process to be helpful and if they think the app is going to be of utility to them. So that's one of the other reasons why we built out the purchase flows in web technology rather than native. And as we've started to install these QR codes at outside rides and shows and restaurants, we have found that it's been driving a significant amount of revenue. So this approach is definitely working for us. Our pre-visit experience transformation was a little bit different from the mobile app work that we did. So unlike the mobile app where we had to go from a 0 to a 1, our websites were probably a 4 on 10, and we were trying to get it to like a 7 or an 8 on 10. So if you looked at our websites about a year ago, they looked like they were built in the early days of the internet and did not really represent brands well. We did not have a good design system that pulls everything together. The majority of our experiences were designed for desktop users, while mobile represented 75-80% of our traffic. And then when we did build some data foundation to understand what was going on with the website performance, we noticed some pretty unexpected things. There were massive drop-offs in the very last step of the conversion funnel in checkout. We had pretty high latency in critical actions through the purchase process, like add to cart or going to the checkout flow. And then we weren't doing a very good job of representing all the conservation work that we had done. So the transformation work on the website was actually, I would say it was a very scientific approach we took to redesigning our websites. Typically, if there is a new product or a digital leader and they're embarrassed by how the sites look, the first thing they will do is attempt to redesign. But we took a very different approach to modernizing our websites, and I'll kind of walk through that because I think it was pretty unique. The first thing that we did was build out a comprehensive data foundation. So what that means is we didn't have customer feedback. We started getting customer feedback. We didn't have granular conversion funnel reporting on our websites. We did that. We had A/B testing capabilities. No one was using it, so we started using A/B testing capabilities. We did not have page interaction data, so we started building on that as well. And then that collective data helped us form a few hypotheses. And then over the course of 2021, we ran about 50 different experiments across our 12 sites on different components to identify what works for our customers and what doesn't. And when we got wins from a number of those A/B tests, we took all of those learnings, handed it off to a designer who was building a new design system, and said, constrain your new designs to the wins from these A/B tests. And then once we're able to get these new components developed, we reran the A/B tests and make sure that it was at least driving the kind of conversion impact that we had seen with the earlier tests that we had done in 2021. So we went through a pretty large modernization process, but I think it was a pretty long process. But I think it was, in retrospect, it was the absolute right thing to do. And then we fixed a number of things under the hood as well. We improved page load times and API response times pretty significantly. And then our errors also decreased pretty significantly, either because we eliminated errors that shouldn't have been there to begin with, or we were able to provide more actionable error messages that customers could use to recover from. So we've been, this is my last slide. We're about 2 years into the digital transformation work as a team. And while it's been a fairly painstaking journey, it's also been really incredibly fulfilling from a team accomplishment standpoint. So you guys will see here on the bottom left some of the outcomes that we had. We shared this in a recent earnings call, so most of this is not proprietary information. We took our app ratings from the lowest rated apps, probably in the theme park industry, to industry-leading ratings. We were able to get the usage of the app in the park to nearly half the groups in the park using the app. This was low single-digit percentage when we got started on the journey. The app is definitely driving incremental revenue. So today, depending on the category of in-park products that you talk about, anywhere from 10 to 30% of in-park revenue comes through our mobile apps. And then we did see some selective labor savings in some areas because customers are not dealing with people, they're dealing with a mobile app, and we've been able to drive more self-service. And then our websites are still in the process of going through this modernization. I would say we're probably about 70-80% done with a lot of that modernization work. But we saw a nice lift in the website feedback score that had been pretty stable before we started doing all of this work. We increased that about 20%. We saw a single-digit percentage lift in conversion from all of the 50-something A/B tests that we did, which was great. It's tens of millions of dollars for the company. Our errors and critical components of the website decreased by nearly 2/3, and then we've also been able to get some pretty significant gains in page load times and API response times. So I've tried to summarize the learnings here, and we can talk about this in a little more detail during the Q&A if you guys are interested. But some of the takeaways, as I kind of look back at the last 2 years, were that small teams can get a lot of things done as long as you have the right process and people. In our case, what worked is having hands-on teams that can both manage projects and people and contributors, individual contributors. I think that was incredibly helpful. And like I was saying, most of these folks have been on the team because they have the ability and capability, and that's what we prioritized over someone with perfectly relevant theme park experience. We review our objectives and key results as a larger digital team on a weekly basis. So people are reminded not to do busy work and to stay focused on the goals that we signed up for. So they've been pretty laser focused, and I think that process has been also really helpful as part of our culture. And this also means you have to get comfortable saying either no or not yet, or we can find other ways to solve problems when other partners or your boss reaches out and asks you to work on things that may not directly impact your vision or the goals that you've signed up the team for. In the data area, there were a number of interesting things that we've done there. We set up daily reporting on key metrics that matter. It's also really important when you talk about a particular project to balance what I call the success metrics with the project counter metrics. So when you launch features, you're not always going to have all metrics improve. You're going to have some metrics improve that you probably care about, and then you're probably going to have a regression or some of your metrics going bad. We can talk about that in more detail in the Q&A. I can share an example, but like you have to be. I think we've been fairly clear about what those trade-offs looks like, and we've been able to make decisions. We talked about prioritization earlier, but like being ruthless about prioritization also was incredibly helpful. And then the most scientific way to understand the impact of any of the work that my team has been doing, where possible, has been to leverage experimentation. So Optimizely recognized our team for having the best experimentation practices this year at one of their annual events. So if you guys are interested in learning more about that, I strongly encourage you to read the Optimizely Seaworld case study that we published, and that'll walk through a lot of the best practices that we followed during the experimentation phase. And then going back to what Mahit was saying about experimentation, like because many of us have been new to the theme park business, we've kind of leaned on first principles for digital optimization. This means, things like you will drive revenue if you're able to either increase desirability or decrease friction or decrease confusion. I've done that in a number of industries in multiple environments, and that's almost always worked. So you don't have to come up with something that's completely new. I think if you lean on the first principles, you will get some wins. We have never tried to make anything perfect. So there's a number of opportunities both on our apps and our websites, and we completely recognize that there's more work to be done there. But we have always applied the 80-20 rule to try to solve most of the problems and make a pretty significant step change that is achievable in a short period of time, while we continue to work towards a longer term vision. We talked about some thoughtful engineering decisions, like when you use native technology, web technology, building feature flags are really important. And then one thing that I think is really important to call out here is we have such a small team that we have no leeway to do busy work. So it's really important for us to build features and then make sure that we iterate on these features enough that it's either able to move the needle on a cost metric or a revenue metric or a customer experience metric. Otherwise, it's really not helpful and not a great use of resources. So we've tried to follow this pretty diligently. And then identifying dependencies pretty early and understanding the motivations of your partners is also pretty important if you need to influence them. I think we've been able to strategize and do that. And I'll wrap up with one I think that's often forgotten, but it's really important. It's not enough to be able to do good work. I think it's also incredibly important to be able to communicate those using compelling stories. And I'll try to share this with an example as I wrap up. I believe it was a cart optimization experiment that I was trying to go and explain to the board. And initially, I had thought about having just one slide and talking about, okay, this drove tens of millions of dollars of impact, and like this is what we tried, and that's that. But what is really compelling was when I went to the board and we spent a lot of time talking about how the hypotheses were generated in before we started testing. So we walked through what were people clicking on, why were they clicking on something, where were the rage clicks or frustrations, and then how were we able to use that to come up with hypotheses. We also walked through how many failed experiments we had before we finally landed on something that was pretty successful. And then we were able to extrapolate the implications of that on, like I was saying before, on not just the admissions revenue, but also the impact revenue, depending on what people bought. And that, I got some great feedback about that. So I think it's also really important for you to be able to build a compelling story on your successes. So that's my last slide. I think I've spent 35 minutes on this. So let's head over to questions.
Thanks, Ko. That was remarkable, especially the last slide where you talk about the successes and how you have quantified them. I think that's really, really remarkable. So in terms of the questions, I could tee us off with some of the questions that our attendees have submitted beforehand. And for our attendees who are live today, folks, you could ask your questions in the Q&A section using the Q&A feature. And towards the end, towards roughly the last 5 minutes or so, we will open it up for live Q&A. So there are a bunch of pre-submitted questions, very, very interesting, and I'm trying to tease out some common themes from those. One of the very interesting ones, and I think it's at a high level, is they're asking about some of the key benefits of a digital turnaround. There are, of course, I believe, the benefits to revenue, right? I mean, you said you are a for-profit institution. There are, of course, the benefits to the business. But what other benefits have you been able to see in your organization as a result of this digital turnaround?
Yeah, I think there are a number of interesting things that I touched upon through the deck that I'll recap. So in addition to, so there's a very direct correlation to short-term revenue, like you were saying. If you can build features that you can run A/B tests on and show that everything else being equal, this feature delivered X million dollars of revenue compared to the other one, that's like pretty straightforward. But in the case of mobile food ordering as an example, what we've been able to see is we've been able to increase operational efficiency in the park. So in the case of one of the restaurants that was reconfigured to allow mobile food ordering, on the days when it was incredibly busy and you saw more people start using mobile food ordering rather than going to the point of sale, we actually saw that we were able to staff it with 4 people rather than 5, right? So that would be an example of cost savings that we would see. And then typically, as a product manager, you tend to have more of a customer experience focus than you have a business focus. So typically the work that product managers like us do is we try to improve the customer experience. And while it may not directly show up in next quarter's revenue, you're definitely going to find that the lifetime value of the customer improves over time. So you're going to see, for example, that the retention rate on your annual pass members will increase if, as an example, they've been interacting with the mobile app, right? So that's so you're probably going to see more long-term benefits of a lot of the work that you do rather than short-term.
Okay, and we have a question related to the long-term benefits, but that comes later. Now, in your presentation, and even when you were answering the last question, you talked about communicating with the board. You talked about communicating with other C-level executives and stakeholders. Could you please speak to that? Is there a cadence? Is there a suggested cadence? Is there a frequency that you that in your mind works very well? I mean, how often should you be communicating? Should you be communicating at all the stage gates when you're ideating, when you have a plan? I mean, what are your thoughts around that communication?
I think it really depends on what your role, level, and your responsibilities are. As a rule, throughout most of my product management career, I would not go talk to a senior executive unless um, I had a debate that I thought would be interesting to have with that person, or I had some interesting data to show them on something that we had accomplished. So I'm really not the kind of person that would go set up like a 30-minute discussion with somebody just for the sake of setting it up, because these people are busy and you're not there to waste their time. So I think it really depends on what level you're at. For example, I communicate with the board on a quarterly basis because that's just a part of how public companies work, and we're required to do quarterly board meetings. But other than that, I would say like it really depends on the situation and the topics that you have on hand. But I think a lot of it also comes down to the kind of executive that you're working with. Some of them will want to be significantly more involved in every step, and some of them will not. In my case, as an example, my chairman chairman of the board is pretty into the details. And, there are times when I've showed him things before they launch. There have also been times when I've chosen not to show him things, and we've run the tests. And when I have the data, I've gone back, and so that decision is not biased, and we can consciously make some decisions based on the data rather than people's opinions, right? So I don't know if that was a helpful answer, but
no, that's pretty helpful. That's there is no specific one right or wrong answer, but that's pretty helpful, to present the way that you're thinking about it. The other question is pretty interesting, and I'm not sure if it applies to your case or not, but they're asking what are the key safety challenges during a digital turnaround. Now that could be information security, that you're dealing with a physical product, anything related to safety, security that comes to your mind, any vignette, anything that the organization said you have to be particularly careful about.
I don't think people were concerned about security necessarily, like either data going missing or some sort of a breach. I think what the people were really concerned about is we hadn't invested in digital for a very long time, or maybe forever, and they didn't want to make the business any worse than it has been performing. Because obviously, like I came in, roughly about a third into the turnaround process, and the company had already had a number of record quarters. So, I think the guardrails were there to make sure that we didn't regress in our business performance as a result of doing a number of things, which is why also I think the cautious and scientific approach we took to measure every bit of the transformation and show that it was net incremental to what we already had was incredibly helpful. Other than that, we obviously work with a number of external partners, and we do our due diligence to make sure that they go through all the information security processes that our technology team goes through. But we haven't had any major concerns with that. We've definitely broken our websites during launches. These are, some collateral damage that you have to take for like an hour or two. If it happens like once in a few months, it's okay. But net, this has worked out really positive for us.
Yeah, it's as if you were reading my mind. That was going to be my next question. Not all A/B tests, not all trials are going to be successful, right? I mean, you may have to take a step sideways or a step back before you take two steps forward. What about that kind of risk management where it actually had an impact, where it actually had a negative impact, possibly a revenue blip of sorts? You were trying something, didn't pay out because it wasn't the right time. The scaffolding around it wasn't, proper. So what about that? What about that kind of risk management? Could you speak to that risk management in the digital turnaround?
Yeah, when you're running, this is true of any company, when you're running experiments and you're running those many experiments, um, typically the success rate for experimentation is anywhere from 15 to 20%. That means 80% of your A/B tests will fail.
Mhm.
So knowing that, um, knowing that you can make tens of millions of dollars on one side if these are successful, at the same time, the ones that are not successful could potentially, you could lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it could happen at a time when you have your busiest time of the year. You've got to be really careful about how you run these experiments. So some of the things that we've done is we will spend a lot of time pre-vetting the test in a smaller group before it goes live. We will make sure we're not running random tests, but uh, we are generating hypotheses based on data, and we will make sure that we're running tests that have a high likelihood of success rather than just running random tests. And then we absolutely make sure that we start with a small share of traffic, like 5%, 10%, monitor it for a few days, look at the data, and then only when we know that it's not harmful do we end up increasing the traffic. And then we'll also look at um, we will test on lower traffic sites, and then over time we start building it up to higher traffic sites. We try not to do something during a big sale like Black Friday. So these are all some of the guardrails that we take to mitigate risk. Yeah.
Okay. And speaking of measurement and risk, in the spirit of product management, we try to measure how we are doing here at Products That Count. So for our attendees who are watching this live today and those who will be watching this later, we'll be following up with a survey. And that survey is pretty quick. We ask you to rate us. Then we ask you to provide your suggestions. That helps us do better. That feedback we share with our speaker as well. So that's incredibly helpful for us. Yeah, and like in the spirit of data-driven product management. With that, we have time for probably two more questions, and I'm looking towards the attendees if there are any questions from our attendees. My next question is around the timing of this digital turnaround. We, of course, make pro forma, kind of approximations. How long will it take? What will our, what will the likely benefits of, this turnaround? But the timing can be off. What about that particular timing where it either pleasantly surprised you and the positive results came faster than expected, or where they were slower than expected, so you had to do, some tweaking around it? Could you speak to the timing?
I mean, I'll be completely transparent and say this is the first time that I've done like a 0 to 1 kind of transformation in the company. So going in, it was as new to me as it is to you, Mahit. Didn't really know what to expect, but I think we were able to hire a team fairly quickly. I think we got a few quick wins within the first 90 days. That was pleasantly surprising to me because I think we were able to go back and share some of these wins with the board of directors that invested in this team, and we've got, I would say, 70-80% of the benefit from this transformation in the first 12 to 18 months. So I thought this would be 3 years of transformation, but a large chunk of that has been achieved in the first 18 months. So I would say things are going either as expected or slightly better. Obviously, I want to continue to do more and faster, and that's the feedback that my team has every week from me as well as the other leaders. But I think we're exactly where we should be, if not slightly better.
Okay, that's great. That's a good position to be in. So before I ask my last question, I wanted to ask Elise if she had a question as well. I mean, she is our content provider, and she she has great thoughts around this. So Elise, any question from your end before I ask my last question?
I appreciate that, Maheep. So far, all of my questions were answered in the presentation, and then you took the rest of them / the audience. So
Yeah.
I will let you proceed with your final
Okay.
question. I appreciate that, Maheep.
Thank you. Costa, coming back to the theme, again, this is more of a general question, less of Seaworld focus. Coming back to the general theme of execution being a very important product management skill, right? Ideation is, and design is, and customer empathy is, and all of those skills are important, but so is execution. You said you have led a digital turnaround of this scale for the first time, and we see the successful outcome. If you were to do this, and your last slide did talk about this, in effect, I'm asking you to rehash that last slide. What about the execution skills could you take to some other place? Like if you had to, boil it down and you had to talk about execution skills being important for product managers, could you speak to those?
Yeah, I think at a very high level, people don't get any points for being smart. People get points for getting things done and driving results. So with regard to execution, I will say, like, one is you've got to have the ability to take really complex problems and try to and find ways to break them down into achievable and quick wins, right? We've been able to pretty nicely balance some of the long-term improvements with some short-term wins, and I think that's it is a very important skill to have, to not try to boil the ocean, but at the same time you've got to be able to take something that's really complex and try to break it down on things that can be achieved. So as an example, a lot of the optimization work that we've done so far has been front-end experience optimization. I haven't spent too much time going under the hood and building crazy new capabilities, and that's all intentional. So I think I would say, like, that's probably one important thing. It is, like I was saying, it's also really important to have a high chance of success from features that you're working on. And you get that by doing enough due diligence upfront. So you want to spend all your time not all your time, you want to spend a significant amount of time in the data to understand why something is an opportunity, and then work with your cross-functional team to make sure that they validate that. Then you're going to get into the actual feature development, and then building out MVPs, getting feedback early will make sure that you're on the right track. Because if you spend a bunch of resources and time on something, and it turns out to be something that is not moving the needle, that is a complete waste of time for you and everybody else that was involved in the project. So you want to do enough due diligence upfront on something being something that you want to work on, and then you want to continue to follow up at every stage along the way with people that may be able to help you make some of those decisions and validate things. And then what you're trying to do is either you're trying to iterate on a feature and improve it until it moves the needle, or you're trying to cut your losses quickly so you're not wasting your time moving forward with it. The other thing I think that's pretty important from an execution standpoint is how you're able to handle dependencies, right? So in the roles that we're in as product managers, you don't own any team and you're held accountable to the goals, and you have to influence a number of people around you to do the things that you want to do. So, I can take a slightly different approach now because of the role that I'm in. But going through a lot of my early product management career, I had to spend a considerable amount of time understanding what motivated individual partners Was it they were bought into the company strategy and the mission, and that's the case that I had to make? Were they data driven, which means I had to go with a bunch of data and do that? Would they take a referral first from someone that they trusted who knew my quality of work and therefore be able to unblock my dependencies? What objectives and key results were they driving for, and can I find a way to improve their metric and my metric? So I think there has to be, I don't know how other people do this, but I would spend a considerable amount of time thinking through how to influence my partners and unblock some of these dependencies. And I think that becomes a pretty important part of being able to execute well.
Yeah, and I think you just summarized effective stakeholder management right there. So I said that was the last question, but on a happy note, you are close to the customer. You've watched hundreds of hours of videos of them interacting with the website. You quoted a quote saying that the app was a wrapper, right? Any happy quote to share? So once you saw this improvement, once the app became highly rated, any comment, any good comment that sits with you, that delights you?
Yeah, we have a number of them. Let me see if I can find some of these here. Hang on.
Yeah.
So I'm actually reading the first App Store preview, and so this person had given us I think like a 1 or 2 star rating. They had a bunch of negative comments, and then in July 2021, after we launched the new app, they actually went back and updated their app rating, and then it reads update exclamation exclamation exclamation. They finally listened and made a real app that's useful. Love that you can see all the dining areas and all the menus, but most of all my passes are available in a super convenient way.
Okay, so it had a tangible impact, right? And these are the kind of moments that you live for. Well, thank you, Ko. It's been amazing talking to you. I mean, you speak from a position of strength. You speak from a position of having delivered these successes, this successful digital turnaround. So it was an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you. And
thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. And with that, Elise, I'll hand it over to you. Please take us home.
Yes, I'd just like to echo what Mahip said. I think you took something that can be very daunting and intimidating, and you provided some great examples, and you broke it down in a way that really makes sense, and that can be really impactful. So thank you both again for this incredible webinar. This will go live on our website. Stay posted on that. It'll be shared on social media, so keep an eye out for that as well. And again, thank you both, and have a great night, everyone who came and joined us. Day, night, whatever it is.
Thank you.
Guys.
Bye-bye.